you're worried. And the more you think about this thing you're worried about, the bigger it seems to get. As if it's looming like a big heavy black cloud over everything you do, giving you the feeling that something is going to go wrong any minute now. How can you tell? You can just feel it. It's as if you spend more time in your head than actually looking around to realise that things, although not great, are fine. You're exhausted from worrying. But deep down there's a part of you that feels it would be irresponsible to stop worrying, as if that part of you would watch everything crumble and sigh, look, that happened because we stopped worrying, which is why it feels so convincing to tell yourself that if you just think about this thing a little bit more, then you'll finally feel better. But of course the relief never fully arrives, does it? Instead, this looming, stomach-churning feeling that something is going to go wrong any minute just continues to get louder. If all of this is sounding too relatable up until now, then let me reassure you on something that you're going to completely reject. You are not broken. Worrying isn't who you are, and you don't have to let it continue leaking your energy. You can free yourself from it. But the problem is, no one's ever taught you how. Instead, all you've ever heard is to meditate more, stop overthinking, and be a bit more grateful, which, let's be honest, such pieces of advice are just as annoying as the worry in itself. Which is why, in the next few minutes of this video, I'm going to share with you the other solution. The solution that, in my experience, actually helps you stop worrying and get your life and energy back. But before we dive straight into that solution, and in order for it to fully sink in, there's something that we need to understand first. Something that is going to sound completely absurd. But once I learned it a few weeks ago, it completely shifted my whole reality. You worry because your brain has convinced you it's helpful. Not because you're an anxious person, simply because your brain is convinced the more you worry, the more you'll be able to see round dark corners. That's why worrying feels so responsible, and why stopping it feels like someone has just ripped your life jacket off while you're in open waters. The truth is that even though our brains do it all the time, worrying is just planning that never ends, which we're going to circle back to when we cover the solution in a few minutes' time. So, okay, great. Why does this all matter? Well, you already know this on a deep bodily level, but worrying too much at the wrong time is no different from letting the smoke alarm in your kitchen constantly ring out. It's stressful. Because when you worry, you put your nervous system in a state of suspense, convinced that trouble is lurking just around the corner, you know, like saber-toothed tiger kind of trouble. Which is, come to think about it now, why you have the general feeling that something is off, someone is mad at you, or something wrong is going to happen any minute from now, even though you just stood in your kitchen pouring cornflakes and milk into a bowl. It's also why you feel like you've run a marathon in your mind, even though you've been standing still for the last 10 minutes. So before we cover this solution and free ourselves from worrying, why would we even be invested in a solution to stop worrying in the first place? What's the upside? Your brain is always going to worry to some extent, but the upsides of reducing that worry even slightly are worth it. And they can best be summarised like this. Imagine all of the mental and physical energy that gets leaked out of you when your mind focuses and previews imagined disasters. Now imagine all of that energy is freed up for you to use. The result? You get your life back. And you'll no longer be walking around with this gnawing ache that my life is happening, but I'm not really in it. And instead you'll be able to presently, playfully, peacefully focus on whatever or whoever is in front of you. Your partner, the first date, your friends, your family, the deep work, the hobby. Your life gets better when your worry reduces. So if that sounds good, then you're ready for the protocol, which can best be summarised like this. When your mind is looping in the clouds, you need to let it land. Here's each step of the protocol in more detail. We're going to go through each step individually, and then in a few minutes' time I'll bring them all together on the board so you can see how they synchronize together. The first point is label. You can't solve something you can't see, which is why the first step on this protocol is to simply notice when your mind is away in the clouds and you're worrying. And the easiest way to do this is to simply become aware of when your mind is busy, and then preferably say something along the lines of, my mind is pretty busy right now, to yourself out loud. You don't need to do any action in this step. Simple awareness is the first step. The reason why this works is because when you label what is going on in your mind with language, you distance yourself from it, which prevents you from identifying with that part of you that is worrying. And as the saying goes, if you can name it, then you can tame it. This part sets up everything else that follows. And the second part that follows this is you then need to ask yourself a question once you notice your mind is in the clouds and worrying. Point 2 in the protocol is ask. Now, quick recap here. What we said earlier is you worry because your brain is convinced it's helpful. And we're going to use that piece of information to highlight why this part of the protocol is the most important. Now we understand it's convinced worrying is helpful. The solution is you then need to teach your brain the difference, you need to teach your brain what's helpful and what's not. In short, planning is helpful, worrying, or in other words, looping the problem in your mind, is unhelpful. Quick personal example here. Before we dive into the actual differences between the two. Late 2024, I was lost. I was living in another house than I was somewhere else in the UK, but I was fed up with the UK and I just wanted to leave. So in the following 6 months, late 2024, I spent the whole time coming up with new countries to go to in my head, and I got the shortlist down to about 6 countries, some of which were Costa Rica, Mexico, Colombia, and there was 3 others I can't fully remember. So I spent those 6 months weighing up the pros and cons of going to each country to start my new life there, but early 2025 I broke down from confusion. My mind felt foggy, my shoulders were tense all of the time, and no new information I was getting was helping me make the decision. So one day, absolutely fed up of feeling broken down and not making any progress, I went to the gym and I said to myself, by the time I come back, I'm going to have made a decision about where in the world I'm going. An hour later, after my workout, I came back home and I booked my flights to Mexico. As soon as I pressed book on that screen and the screen refreshed and said confirmed, my shoulders relaxed and all the worry I had melted away. So quick personal example there. Now let's deepen and pick apart that example by differentiating between planning and worrying. Planning. Useful planning ends in a decision. In the case of me, I was going to Mexico. It ends in a next action, or it ends in a clearer path forward. Useful planning asks, what will I do? And you can tell your mind it's rare that your mind will try and plan something of its own accord, other than you sitting down and actually trying to get it to focus on mapping out a plan. But you can tell your mind is trying to usefully plan something because it will feel as if each new thought is getting you closer to a destination. The result being you will feel more calm, secure, aligned, and your emotions will stop wobbling and will start walking straight. Worrying, however, is just replaying danger without a solution, where no new information is helping you. What worrying, being in the clouds, makes you question isn't what will I do, it's what if, what if, what if, what if. No new information is going to help you there. If planning is what helps you navigate a path forward, then worrying is what keeps you lost in the woods, with the set feeling that you're trying to navigate a path forward while looking at a torn map with scribbles all over it. So the key takeaway there, was there anything else I missed? No. The key takeaway there is, didn't mean to rub that out, Planning ends, makes action possible, and lets you relax. Worry loops, stalls action, and keeps your mind busy. So after you've first labelled that your mind is busy, you then need to ask yourself, to yourself in your head or out loud, worrying or planning? Based on this new information that you have. Which one is my brain doing? Remembering the difference is that if your brain is planning, then each new thought and step you take will get you closer to stillness, peace, security, and clarity. Keep following that destination until you arrive there. But if you notice that your mind is worrying, no new information is helping, and you just feel like disaster is gonna strike any minute, then you need to follow the second to last step on the protocol, which is to name it. Looping, worrying is like a fire, and the air it needs in order to keep burning is vagueness, which is why the easiest way to calm yourself down and reduce worry is to get crystal clear on what fear has sparked the fire in the first place. So instead of asking yourself, what if everything goes wrong? What if this happens? What if, remember the what ifs of looping, get clear on what am I actually afraid might happen. Because vague fears feel huge, a huge elephant in the room, and you don't even know where they are. Defined fears feel manageable. So this exercise is the most helpful thing you can ever do when it comes to something you feel worried about or feel fearful towards, and it's called fear setting. Shouts out Tim Ferriss. This is from him. Simple. Either on a piece of paper, journal, or on the notes on your phone, create 3 tables. In one column, you answer, what am I actually afraid might happen? In the middle one, you say, what could I do to prevent that thing from happening? And then in the final column, you think about, well, if that thing did happen, worst comes to worst, how could I repair it if it did? This helps you manage the fear. 3 quick examples. What am I afraid might happen? I tried to give 3 different contexts. I send the text and they blank me. What could I do to prevent it? Be clear why I'm messaging, respect they might be busy. Now it feels a little bit more plan oriented. What could I do to repair it if they did blank me? Well, follow up if I want, respect their choice, invest in people who show up as I do. Now this thing becomes a lot more doable. 2 more examples. What am I afraid might happen? Well, I never figure my life out and end up unhappy. I think a lot of us share this worry. What could I do to prevent it? Keep learning, taking action, and focus on the next step, because then progress will be inevitable. If worse comes to worse, and in a few years' time I do find myself still not figuring my life out and I still feel unhappy, what could I do? Start again if needed, learn from mistakes, reinvent till I get 5% better, remembering that people reinvent themselves all the time. Final one, relationship context. What am I afraid might happen? Well, my partner is upset with me and our relationship falls apart or is falling apart. What could I do to prevent that? Based on the social skills videos I've seen so far, I could listen to them until I understand their point in reference to what they feel upset about and then summarise their points in my own language. But if worse comes to worse and that doesn't work, or they are really upset with me and our relationship is falling apart, how could I repair it? Well, I could repair what I can realistically, if possible. But if worse comes to worse, we can just have the good old difficult conversation of, are you still in this? Are we still committed? I did this once when I was very young because I thought it would be a great idea to be a bartender in a very fancy restaurant when I was about 21. And I had loads of fears. Before my first shift, I wrote them all down and I turned up with actual bouncing, leaning forward confidence rather than worried all the time. This stuff works. It really, really helps. And it's this step that will move you... Wait, what was the last part I wanted to... Yeah, before you move on, there's the final step that makes sure you turn this looping into action after you've named your fear. Right, final step. And so now you've named the fear, figured out a few ways to prevent it from happening, and even figured out a few ways to repair the damage were it to happen, you now need to prevent yourself from making the biggest mistake most people make here, which is letting their brain conclude, after having done all of those things, nice, now we've done that, let's loop this thing 30,000 times within the next 3 hours. So in order to prevent your brain from doing that, you need to get clear on what it needs in order to close this loop and get this thing off your mind. And most of the time, the thing it needs is a decision. Think about what we said earlier at the beginning of this video, just to really explain this. We said that worrying isn't responsible, it's just planning that never ends. So in order for that planning to end, you need to decide to stop planning. In other words, you need to admit that no more thinking, information gathering or planning is going to make you feel better about this thing that you fear. And instead, you're just going to decide to move forward with the information that you have. Key thing to note here, which blew my mind when researching for this video, the whole goal of planning isn't certainty, it's a decision. Worrying, on the other hand, is, as we've covered, is what gets you to ask another question, find another solution, ask another question, find another solution, convinced that the more that you do that, the closer you'll get to 100% certainty. But the problem is, it's not even that you won't achieve 100% certainty, it's that you can't achieve 100% certainty. So the bottom line is, most of the time when you're searching for more information beyond a plan already being made, you're just trying to find certainty where there is none. And in which case, you need to recognise that you're in this loop. How do you do so? Well, very simply, if you've named... Oh, where's my green pen? If you've named the fear, created a prevention plan, or just thought of one way to prevent it from happening, and even just thought about one way to repair the damage were it to happen, but your brain is still looping disaster in your mind, then you're searching for certainty where there is none. And instead, you just need to decide to stop planning, and you need to decide to accept the uncertainty that you face. But let's be honest, final thing to mention here before we give the summary of the main points of this video. Me saying that still stings a little bit, because on an emotional level you understand, well yeah, but Lewis, like, uncertainty is still hard to face. That doesn't make it any easier. So in order to make facing the uncertainty and accepting it a little bit easier, here's something that I learned when I was 18 years old, which fundamentally changed my life. Think about uncertainty this way, through the lens of something called the backwards law of life. The more you try to feel certain about things, the more uncertain you feel. But in a very paradoxical and backwards way, the more you accept uncertainty, the more certain you feel. What else was I going to mention? Yeah. So the wrap up here is, planning isn't finished when certainty arrives. It's finished when you decide to stop. In summary, when your mind is looping in the clouds, you need to let it land. First of all, label the busyness of your mind out loud to yourself. Then ask yourself, am I worrying or planning? If you're worrying, you get the sense that no new thinking about this thing is reaching a positive destination, then you need to name the thing you're actually fearing in clear language. Then think of 1 to 2 ways you could prevent that thing from happening, and also 1 to 2 ways you could repair the damage were it to happen. And then finally, you need to decide to stop planning beyond that point in order to get this thing off your mind and get your life and energy back. Finally, 3 key points from the video were: worrying isn't proof you're broken, it's proof your brain is convinced worrying is helpful. Brilliant, thanks brain. Planning and worrying are different. Planning ends in decisions and actions, worrying loops in circles. And then finally, the goal of planning isn't certainty, it's reaching a good enough decision that moves you forward anyway. Thank you very much for your time and attention. Stay disciplined, playful and dangerous. Adios, muchachos y muchachas.